Hey there! Want to learn natural English without even realizing it? This story is perfect for you. As you listen, your brain will automatically pick up new vocabulary, grammar, and advanced sentence patterns, all in a super fun way. So hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our daily English stories. All right, let's dive in. Jack had always dreamed of visiting Paris. Not in the romantic, movie-style way with roses and violinists on the street corners. More like he simply wanted to wander around, breathe in the history, watch people go about their lives, and sit quietly somewhere with a cup of coffee. That was his entire plan, if you could even call it a plan. He landed on a cool spring afternoon, wearing a faded denim jacket that was probably too thin for the breeze sweeping through Charles de Gaulle Airport. But he didn't mind. As soon as he stepped out of the terminal and caught his first glimpse of French road signs and tiny European cars zipping by, a strange sense of calm washed over him. This was exactly where he wanted to be. The drive into the city was almost too much to take in. Every few blocks, his driver slowed down, and Jack would crane his neck to look at charming balconies or watch a local with a baguette tucked under their arm. Paris didn't try to impress him with flashy billboards or giant glass towers. Instead, it whispered old stories through its narrow streets and slightly cracked building facades. His hotel was tucked away on a side street near Montmartre, with ivy crawling up its stone walls. The room was tiny, hardly enough space to stretch his arms out without bumping into a wall. But when he pushed open the little window, sunlight spilled in, and he could see rooftops stretching out in every direction, chimneys puffing gentle trails of smoke. It felt more alive than any skyscraper view ever could. Jack spent his first evening just walking. No map, no GPS, no mission. He wandered past bakeries that smelled like sweet butter, past shops overflowing with postcards and tiny Eiffel Tower keychains. Every so often, he'd catch a glimpse of the real Eiffel Tower peeking through the gaps between buildings, reminding him that he was thousands of miles from home. The next morning, he woke up early, determined to experience one of those simple Parisian pleasures he'd seen in countless photos, sipping a coffee on a terrace, watching the world drift by. He didn't rush. He took a long shower, pulled on a clean white t-shirt, and let his feet guide him through the neighborhood. By mid-morning, he found himself on a quiet side street lined with little cafes. One had a row of small round tables outside, each with a single chair turned to face the street. That detail struck him. It was like every person was meant to sit alone, peacefully observing life. He chose a table at the edge, settled in, and ordered a café crème. The waiter barely nodded, disappeared inside, and returned a minute later with a steaming cup on a tiny saucer, accompanied by a single sugar cube and a delicate silver spoon. Jack stirred it slowly, watching the cream swirl into the dark liquid, turning it a soft caramel color. He took his first sip and closed his eyes for just a heartbeat. It wasn't that the coffee was dramatically better than any he'd ever had. It was more about the moment, about the cool metal chair under him, the faint scent of blooming flowers from a nearby shop, the gentle chatter of French voices floating through the air. Here, he wasn't rushing off to a meeting or mindlessly scrolling his phone. Here, he was just present. As he sat, people passed by. An elderly man with a tiny white dog tucked under his arm. Two teenage girls sharing a pair of earbuds, giggling about something Jack couldn't understand. A woman in a long tan coat cycling by with a basket full of fresh produce. Each tiny scene felt like a secret performance put on just for him. At some point, he realized he'd been sitting there for nearly an hour, barely touching his phone except to snap a few photos of his cup with the street behind it. The waiter came by again, gave him a polite nod, and refilled his glass of water without a word. Jack thanked him with a smile, marveling at how easy everything seemed here. No one rushed him. No one seemed to care how long he stayed. Jack leaned back in his chair, letting the last drops of his café crème warm his throat. Around him, the small Parisian street continued its slow, graceful dance. Delivery bikes zipped past with baskets full of bread. A young couple stopped at the corner to look at a paper map, not their phone, but an actual folded map, and argued playfully about which street to take. A waiter across the way laughed with a group of locals over something Jack couldn't catch. It all seemed so beautifully ordinary. Eventually, he stood up, stretched his arms, and decided to wander further. He left a few crisp euro notes on the little silver tray and nodded to the waiter, who responded with a casual, almost sleepy merci. There was something unforced about the exchange that Jack liked. No fuss, no exaggerated friendliness, just mutual respect, a quiet understanding that each person was simply going about their life. Jack had no destination in mind, so he let the streets choose for him. He strolled past bookstores that looked older than his grandparents', with faded covers piled up in the windows. He peeked into a tiny gallery where abstract paintings covered every inch of the wall, and an old man inside was rearranging frames like it was the most important job in the world. He paused at a corner florist, drawn in by the explosion of colors, soft pink peonies, electric orange tulips, and bundles of tiny white daisies wrapped in brown paper. Eventually, he found himself along the Seine. The river moved with a quiet certainty, reflecting the bright midday sun in shifting ripples. Tour boats drifted by, each loaded with people pointing cameras in every direction. Jack walked down a set of stone steps to the edge of the water, found a spot to sit, and let his legs dangle above the river. The stone was warm from the sun, and he could smell the faint mossy scent of the water below. Time blurred. He must have sat there for nearly half an hour, just watching. A little boy tossed bits of bread into the river and laughed every time a duck raced over to snatch a crumb. A street musician nearby started playing a soft, slow tune on an old accordion, filling the air with a kind of melancholy sweetness that seemed to match the lazy afternoon perfectly. As the song drifted to a close, Jack stood up and continued his wandering. He crossed one of the many arched bridges, stopping in the center to lean against the rail. From there, he could see Notre Dame in the distance, its towers wrapped in scaffolding. Even under construction, it had an undeniable power, like a sleeping giant waiting to wake. On the other side of the river, Jack stumbled into a weekend market. Tables were piled high with old books, dusty records, faded posters of French films from decades past. Vendors called out friendly greetings, but never pushed. Jack flipped through a stack of postcards, each with a black and white photo of Paris in some long ago year. He ended up buying one that showed the Eiffel Tower half shrouded in fog, thinking he might tuck it into his journal later. Feeling a little hungry, he let his feet carry him toward a narrow street that seemed promising. Sure enough, he found a tiny bakery with golden pastries lined up like soldiers behind the glass. He pointed at a flaky croissant, paid with a few coins, and stepped outside to eat it. The crust shattered at the first bite, raining tiny crumbs onto his shirt. Butter oozed between the delicate layers, and for a moment, Jack closed his eyes and simply stood there, savoring it. This was Paris. Not the big monuments or the guided tours, but a simple pastry eaten on a sun-dappled street. Later, as afternoon stretched toward evening, he wandered back in the general direction of his hotel. Along the way, he noticed how the light had changed. It turned softer, almost golden, draping itself over the city like a gentle hug. Cafes began to fill up again. Waiters swept by carrying trays loaded with tiny cups, glasses of wine, and small plates that looked almost too pretty to eat. Jack found himself wishing he could press pause on everything just to keep this feeling a little longer. But there was comfort in knowing that tomorrow, Paris would still be here, unfolding itself in quiet, magical ways. Jack woke up the next morning to a gentle light spilling across his tiny hotel bed. For a moment, he lay still, enjoying the soft sounds drifting in through the cracked window, a distant bell chiming the hour, footsteps on the cobblestones below, someone calling out bonjour with a laugh. It was a small symphony of city life, and it felt oddly personal, like Paris was whispering good morning just to him. He decided not to rush. Today would be his last full day in the city, and he wanted to stretch it out, to savor every ordinary detail. After a quick shower, he pulled on his jeans and a navy sweater, then stepped out into the crisp air. The sky was a gentle gray, hinting at rain later, but for now the weather felt perfect, fresh and slightly damp, carrying the scent of wet stone and spring blossoms. Without really meaning to, Jack found himself heading back toward the cafe from his first morning. It had left such a calm mark on him that he felt drawn there again, like visiting an old friend. When he arrived, he noticed the same waiter was working, wiping down tables and stacking little silver trays. The man recognized Jack too, giving him a small nod that felt surprisingly meaningful. Jack settled into the same chair he'd used before, facing the street, and ordered another café crème. This time, he didn't need to remind himself to slow down. He simply did. He sipped his coffee, watched the flow of people passing by, and felt completely content. A delivery van double parked for a minute, blocking traffic, but no one seemed angry. A group of school kids darted around on a field trip, pointing at buildings and chattering excitedly. An older woman walked by with a huge bouquet of sunflowers peeking out of her bag. Every little thing seemed worth noticing. Eventually, Jack paid his bill, gave the waiter a warm merci beaucoup, and set off to explore one last time. He walked aimlessly, crossing bridges, ducking into narrow alleys, finding small surprises everywhere. A hidden courtyard filled with ivy, a tiny shop selling handmade soaps that smelled of lavender and honey, a weathered fountain gurgling quietly in a quiet square where nobody seemed in a hurry. By late afternoon, he found himself standing on a wide boulevard, looking up at the Eiffel Tower again. From this angle, its iron lattice seemed almost delicate, like lace. Tourists clustered around its base, taking endless photos, but Jack didn't feel the need to go closer. Seeing it from here, half framed by trees and old buildings, felt more authentic somehow, like he was catching a glimpse of Paris living its everyday life, not just performing for visitors. He decided to walk along the river one final time. The light was beginning to shift again, turning that lovely golden shade that made everything look touched by magic. Street lamps blinked on one by one. Musicians set up on corners, their songs weaving through the evening air. Jack stood on a bridge for a long while, watching boats drift lazily beneath him. He thought about how he'd come to Paris hoping for some big revelation, maybe a dramatic moment that would change his life. But what he'd found was something quieter and maybe more lasting, a gentle reminder of how good it could feel to simply be present, to sit with a cup of coffee, to watch strangers live their lives, to let your heart slow down enough to notice how beautiful small things could be. When the sky finally darkened into a deep velvet blue, sprinkled with the first shy stars, Jack turned and began to make his way back to his hotel. Tomorrow he'd catch a taxi, board a plane, and return to the rush of his usual life. But he knew he'd carry this feeling with him, this calm, this gratitude for little moments, long after he left Paris behind. You probably don't even realize how much English you just learned. By listening to this story, Your brain has absorbed tons of natural phrases, advanced structures, and new vocabulary, all without boring exercises. That's the power of storytelling. If you enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss our daily English adventures. And hey, drop a comment. What's the most peaceful moment you've ever experienced in your life? I'd love to hear your stories. See you in the next video.